are dominating that world discourse, and that's why it's so important that we preserve and protect and nourish languages like Jerriais. You'd be surprised to learn, Your Excellency, that it was only in 2019 that the States Assembly, that's our Parliament, you had a virtual tour by the bailiff this morning. It was only in 2019 that it became one of our official languages alongside English and French. But I think that was and has proven to be an important step in ensuring that the language doesn't die. Now, I come from a rural parish out in the west in St. Juan, and it still can be today that you might hear some of the older residents of St. Juan speaking Jerriais to themselves in the pub. Not that I hear it there, or at the end of church over a coffee, or in each other's houses. And it is that passion for the language, it is that use of the language that I hope that our conversation this evening is going to celebrate and help keep those fires of language and interest in it alive. So you are very welcome, Your Excellency, and I hand over now to you just to say a few introductory words, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Senator, for this very nice and very kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir. Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a rare pleasure and honor to speak today at this event, which is organized in cooperation with the Government of Jersey and Jersey Heritage on the occasion of my virtual visit to Jersey Island. Thank you for mentioning this, how important is language, how important is preservation of language, because I can say that history of Polish language is in fact history of Polish nation, history of Polish state, and preservation of language, preservation of culture was the most important issue for the preservation of the independence of the state. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I couldn't come to your beautiful island, but modern technology allows me to spend this evening together and discuss the importance of preservation of different languages, of linguistic diversity. I am grateful to all of you who decided to spend your free Thursday evening to get to know more about Jersey language and Polish language. In fact, the largest Slavic language in the European Union and the second most spoken language in the United Kingdom. Polish language emerged in the 10th century when the Polish state developed itself. Previously a spoken language only, Polish became a written language with the adoption of the Latin alphabet brought by Christianity. Nowadays, there are around 58 million Polish speakers across the world, of which around 38 million people live in Poland. The only official language of the Republic of Poland, according to our constitution, is Polish. The overwhelming majority of the country's population speaks it as a native language or as the language of home communication. However, it wasn't always this way. As Poland was baptized into existence in 966, and later the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth became one of the first Union confederated countries in Europe, a true empire stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, with its tolerant religious policy, Poland became an early instance of cultural melting pot, a country where minorities like Jews, Tatars, Armenians, Scottish, German, of course, Polish, Belarus, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Latvian, and many others, flourished for a long time. The multilingual character of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, for instance, is preserved till this day in rare books printed in 2 or 3 alphabets, usually used in both written and spoken linguistic landscape of the kingdom. Today, I heard a lot about refugees in Jersey Museum. So we have to remember that till partitioning, till the end of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, there was also a lot of refugees, also from the United Kingdom, from Britain, from England, mostly from Scotland. Probably you heard that about 20,000 Scottish people emigrated to Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 16th, 17th century. They were very successful. One of a mayor of Warsaw, our capital, was Scottish. But this multilinguistic state was so unusual that all the noblemen could elected parliament and kings, and they were part of this political community, and it doesn't matter if they are Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox. Unfortunately, the relatively peaceful coexistence of Poles and other minorities was threatened towards the end of the 18th century. Polish lands came under foreign rule when they were partitioned between 3 absolutist monarchies, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Poland was erased from the map of Europe for 100 years, and so was the Polish language. The occupants aimed to denationalize Poles via incremental enforcement of language and culture. The use of Polish language was limited and sometimes prohibited in partitioned Poland. I am underline that because the language was the fundament of the culture, and language was part of the identity of the free citizens who had gathered their own state before partitioning. That's why it played so important role. And after 123 years, in 1918, Poland finally regained independence. However, the most tragic chapter in Poland's history was a result of the pact of 2 aggressors who attacked Poland in September 1939. Hitler and Stalin unleashed the greatest war of our times, with the former being responsible for the appalling tragedy, the genocide of the European Jews, the Holocaust. But altogether, like Timothy Snyder was written in his book Bloodlands, about 40 million civilians were killed in the area of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 30s and 40s of the 20th century. After the war, Poland was smaller in territory and population and far more homogeneous than ever before. It affected also the language, as all ethnic and national minorities were terrorized by communists dependent on Moscow. Finally, after our struggle for freedom, after Solidarity movement, the fall of communism in 1989 was a turning point in our history. Since 1989, Poles again began to learn foreign languages freely, as well as ethnic and minority languages as dialects start to flourish again. However, Poles do not forget that the Polish language is their superpower. You may ask why. Polish is sometimes considered a language of exceptional difficulty and one of the most difficult in the world. The average native Polish speaker themselves become fluent in their language only after the age of 16, while native English speakers achieve fluency at around the age of 12. However, By learning Polish, you gain easy access to other Slavic languages like Czech, Slovak, Croatian, Serbian, Ukrainian, etc. The same goes for other languages. Russian maybe is a little bit more difficult, but also we can understand Russian. So in fact, Polish is easy even for some people because of the Latin script. Some other Slavic languages are using Cyrillic script. So as you can see, Poland is in fact gateway to the entire area of Central and Eastern Europe, and the Polish language is the key. In fact, during the time of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, there was a huge custom that Poles were bilingual. They speak many languages, and in fact, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth recognized at least two languages as their official, Polish and Latin, but in some part also a Ruthenian language, Lithuanian, and others. So after communism, we started to discover how important bilingual, how important is knowledge about other languages, also about small languages or languages of minorities. It is also a key language for all residents of the United Kingdom as dependencies, as Polish is now the main language spoken in England after English, as I mentioned before. I'm sure that also in Jersey it's quite popular because of this 3 or maybe 4% of Polish population there. According to the Polish bill from 2005, there is 16 other languages which is officially recognized as a minority language in Poland. The official recognition gives to the representatives of the minorities certain rights of education in their language, or having language established as a secondary administrative language or help language in their municipalities, of financial support of the state to the promotion of their language and culture. Polish has 5 major dialects spoken in Silesia, Małopolska, Mazovia, Wielkopolska, and Kashubia. Each dialect has several varieties with characteristic and consistent linguistic phenomena. These varieties differ from standard Polish in vocabulary, syntax, pronunciation, and morphology. The variety of languages spoken by the Polish people and ethnic groups, excluding Polish, that have lived in the region for at least 100 years are legally recognized as regional and minority languages, which have appropriate rules of use. In territory administrated areas where the number of minority language speakers or regional language speakers is 20% or greater, the languages can have the status of an auxiliary language for the people, while Polish is still the official language. Such is the case for bilingual countries with the documented population of Kashubian, Belarusian, German, and Lithuanian, and Russian linguistic minorities, where the second language function in administration, education, and sometimes official church liturgy. As you may see, language diversity is a part of Polish history and culture. In a globalized world where foreign languages learning is widely common and using English is the easiest way to communicate in every place of the world, we should remember that the mother tongue is our heritage and we should always protect it. So thank you, merci, badefé. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, for an enlightening and interesting walk through Polish history, and of course how important language is to our cultural identity and the passion that we all have for language. A little bit perturbed by how difficult it is to learn, because I hope you don't mind. We're going to ask you to teach us one word of Polish later on, which I'm hoping that everybody's going to have a try. Now to the studio here, and Geraint, Jennings, you're the passion of Jerriais in the island. Give us a little idea of where Jerriais came from, what the history of it is, and what it means to Jersey.
Well, as His Excellency was saying, with the foundation of the first Polish state, at about the same time, a bit further west in Europe along the coast, coming down from the north, we had the Norsemen, Scandinavian Vikings, settling along the coast, raiding, moving into colonizing, and these Northmen, these Norsemen, founded a state in what is now Normandy, the land of the Northmen, and the Cotentin Peninsula neighbouring us, and the Channel Islands were incorporated into this duchy in the year 933 AD. So already there'd been Norse settlement in what was a Romance-speaking territory. So as Latin had broken up following the collapse of the Roman Empire, people were speaking their own local dialects of Latin, which developed into separate languages or language families. And so Jerriais is now one of the oil languages, the same subfamily of Romance languages derived from Latin as French, Picard, spoken in Picardy, Gallo, spoken in Eastern Brittany, and mainland Norman. Also, going a bit further, Walloon, spoken in Belgium. But what makes Norman a bit different from the other varieties of oil language is the Norse element. So some of the words people in Jersey are very familiar with in terms of place names are actually Viking words, especially connected with our landscape. So the wealth of our landscape and our natural environment is also closely tied to the words we use, which are Jerriais words, whether you're speaking English or whatever, because that tells you part of the place. So a mound is a hug, from Norse haugar, and one of our spectacular prehistoric monuments, a very large prehistoric tomb under a mound, is La Hugby. So people know the word hug from the landscape. And then our sand dunes are miel, which is also a Norse Viking word, which is part of our Romance Latin-based language. And we share these words with people in Guernsey, our neighbouring island, who speak, again, as a minority language, Jerriais, also a variety of Norman. In Sark, another smaller Channel island, unfortunately the language of Orkney, Alderney, died out in the 20th century. It was dealt a death blow by the evacuation of the island's entire population before the arrival of the German military occupiers in 1940. But in mainland Normandy, which is part of the Republic of France, a region of France, the regional government there is now trying to preserve the varieties of Norman spoken not only closest to us, but further across in the east. And basically, someone who speaks Jerriais can have a conversation with somebody from Guernsey, but we have trouble not laughing at each other's accents. There's a lot of rivalry. And then we can have a conversation with someone on the neighbouring coast of mainland Normandy in France. But as you go further across, there's less and less contact, and it becomes less difficult to understand the spoken language, but still we have the written language. Because Norman has a very long literary history, because for a couple of hundred years, at least, it was the official governing language of the Kingdom of England after the Norman conquest in 1066, when we beat the English and we imposed our Norman language on that kingdom when our duke became king. So English contains a lot of Norman words as well, which many people think are French. But no, they're not French, they're Norman in origin. And if I give an example, lots of people find it odd that we talk about a mog in Jerriais. It's a mug. And they think, oh, that's English, that's been borrowed from English. But no, it's the other way round. Mog there, or mock, is a Norman word taken to England twice. So once by the Vikings coming in from the north of England and bringing mug with them from original Norse, and once from the Normans coming up from the south, bringing the word mug into England. So that's an example which of a Jerriais word of Norse origin, which is used in Jerriais, but which is very familiar to English speakers because they've also got a similar, very complicated way of language spreading. And as His Excellency pointed out, there are different dialects of Polish, but there are also different dialects of Jerriais, which some people might find it difficult to understand in such a small island compared to a large country. We've lost some of our dialects over the last 100 years. So Mouitin, the dialect of Lemoy, has disappeared at the end of the 20th century. And the dialect of Faldouet, which has left behind quite a literature spoken in the east of the island, that died out perhaps around the 1930s, or people were still remembering it later. But basically nowadays we have a distinction between the west and the east. So people will have different accents, whether they come from the west of Jersey or the east of Jersey, and there's some different words. And as an example of some of the changes, the word mog, meaning mug, is masculine in the west and feminine in the east.
Pleased to hear it, because I'm in the east.
So you can use la mog, whereas because I have an accent from the west, I will say le mog.
Well, I'm going to drink my mug of tea with a whole different insight now into what it's all about. Thank you very much, Geraint. And I mean, you talked about the history there. That's kind of old history. How has the language survived? Because obviously it's disappeared and disappeared. Less and less people are speaking it. What's been happening in more recent years to try and keep Jerriais going?
Well, one of the things is that we talk traditionally about les tres langues, the three languages. So French was the official language of the courts and politics and government, and also of the church. English was the language of commerce and trade, which meant that Jersey people travelling abroad had an advantage knowing English and French and their own Jerriais, so they could communicate both with trade in France, trade in the British Isles, but also trade in North America, in Canada, big cod fishing in the Gaspé, and being able to control trade on both sides and conduct negotiations in more than one language and getting an advantage. And Jerriais was very much the language of the field, the home, and the workplace. So as the role of English grew with trade and commerce, by the end of the 19th century, St Helier, the capital of Jersey, had become a majority English-speaking town. And there was a political push to make English an official language so that the traders, the shopkeepers, the families who'd come to settle in St Helier from around the British Empire could be represented in politics and government. And so English became a permitted official language of the state in 1900. And there were riots. connected with that. But Jerriais kept its stronghold in the countryside, but really there was a big change with the German occupation, Second World War. Many men went off to fight. Quite a number of families went into evacuation before the arrival of the German military forces, and children spent 5 years growing up in England in evacuation before coming back after the liberation. So those families who stayed in Jersey during 5 years of occupation during the Second World War found Jerriais very useful as a community language, as a language of resistance, to be able to pass messages, to communicate, even to sing songs, put on plays, theatrical productions without the German censors realizing what was going on. But of course, when people came back after the peace and the liberation, there was a different economic situation. There was no longer the stronghold of agriculture. There were new industries, a great boom in tourism, where English speaking was a definite advantage. And then, of course, from the 1960s, a very strong rise of international finance. And of course, with all this job opportunity and economic growth going on, very attractive to people who were using then English as the main form of communication. So by the end of the 20th century, it was clear that if nothing was done, if no positive action was taken, if government didn't step up and actually, provide some support for culture, our native culture, what we have to offer the rest of the world, which is unique to us and which we want to share, would just gradually be forced out by the competing cultural influences. So 1999, a pilot project to introduce Jerriais teaching into primary schools was started. I mean, it's all being done on a voluntary basis, but that program has been built up with materials, getting the written treasury of Jerriais transcribed and available online, so anyone anywhere in the world can look up some of our classic texts, our poems, and of course recordings and archiving, and ensuring that Jerriais has a status. So as Senator Gore said, it was 2019 that Jerriais became the third official language. We've had the 3 languages on our banknotes for several years. So everyone who comes to Jersey, who earns money in Jersey, has Jerriais in their pocket. Of course, we have Jerriais on the money, and we're rolling out more branding in terms of visible signage and use of Jerriais in official purposes. Whereas before it was, Jerriais sort of it's a family thing. It's not proper to have it on official documents or official signage. Now it's, we're proud of who we are. We want to share this with everyone, and people can pick up words easily, and it doesn't matter which accent you have when you come to Jersey. If you want to use Jerriais in that accent, you have a right to do it. As an immigrant, as an incomer, somebody coming to Jersey, if you want to speak Jerriais with a Polish accent, a Portuguese accent, a Scottish accent, a Cockney accent from London, I think that's the sort of welcoming sharing of our culture, which will keep it alive, because if we exclude people, that's a way to reduce diversity. But if we say everyone can be proud of knowing something, and if I can refer to many of the Polish workers who've come to Jersey have picked up a couple of Jerriais words because there's no alternative, because we're familiar to hard-working Polish agricultural workers on our coaties. And,
And a coatie is?
And a coatie is well, what is it in English? We don't have a word for it.
Sloping field?
It's a sloping field. So part of the landscape of Jersey and the traditional agriculture is because we don't have all that much flat land, but there's an advantage in having fields which slope towards the sunshine. And so particular agricultural practices in cultivating these very steep fields, for which we don't have a term in English, but everyone calls them coaties. I mean, many English speakers in Jersey don't realise that that's not an English word. And they'll go off to England and talk about coaties, and people will look at them as though, what, are you mad? No, that's what we call them where we come from.
Wild cat or something, yes.
Yes. So obviously people speaking, whether it's Portuguese or Romanian or Bulgarian or Polish, that's a word they're going to be working in the coaties. And twice a year they'll be going around doing broncage.
Of course.
So very important, because we don't have much space, being a small island, and many of our roads are very, very narrow. And once the grass and the branches start growing, some of our roads and lanes can become almost impassable. So we have a law that twice a year the roads have to be inspected to ensure all the greenery's been cut back, and everyone uses the Jerriais word for that tradition and that traditional practice, broncage. So if you're employing someone on a farm to go out and ensure all the hedges are trimmed and the branches are cut back, people learn that that is broncage.
We use it for haircuts too in our house.
And that's it, it's slang for a haircut as well.
I wonder if I'm able to bring in His Excellency again, just to come off from that, just to talk about, do you find that there's any kind of an appetite amongst young people in your country to keep these languages alive?
Thank you for this question. Yes, that's great. That especially after 1989, these languages flourish. Although after, as I said, after Second World War, after Hitler and Stalin, Poland became one of the most homogenic country in Europe. But we can see that there are some minorities or some groups who became very proud of their tradition and culture, dialect or language. Of course, probably the most famous are Polish Highlanders, who have their own dialect, very strong folk traditions, music, wooden houses style. So everybody who will visit Poland should go to Polish mountains and to see how strong is this tradition. But we can see also that some other groups are more and more keen about their own tradition and their own language or dialect.
Thank you. You talked about famous group there in Poland. We've got a famous connection or two with Jerriais, haven't we? With Victor Hugo and King Arthur. Tell us about that.
Well, if I start with Victor Hugo, His Excellency mentioned refugees. One of the important refugees in the 19th century from France was the famous author Victor Hugo. And he actually encountered a word of Jerriais here on our south coast. He talked to fishermen who were fishing for pieuvre, and he'd never encountered that word before. He took that word with him when he went to Guernsey, where they say pieuvre. It's a bit similar, but he incorporated the word pieuvre, which is the Jerriais word for octopus, into the description of the monstrous, beastly octopus in his novel Les Travailleurs de la Mer, The Toilers of the Sea. And that became such a literary, symbol and such a strong word that Victor Hugo introduced into the French language that now our word pieuvre has become the normal French word for octopus. So everyone who speaks French knows a word of Jerriais thanks to Victor Hugo. And our literature goes way back. So when the Kingdom of England and the Duchy of Normandy were under the same ruler, a poet born in Jersey called Wace or Was wrote chronicles in verse of the history of the Dukes of Normandy and also the history of Britain. And he wrote about the legends of King Arthur. And our Jersey poet, Wace, was the first poet to mention that King Arthur had a round table. So part of our pride in what we have shared through our culture, through our language, and through the traditions which pass through it, are some of these things lots of people know about. Pieuvre, the word for octopus in France, in French, and wherever French is spoken, and also the round table. But perhaps people don't realise so much that they originally came from our island.
Marvellous, our tiny little island. Well, I'd love to be able to bring in the Zoom audience now. I don't know if there's anybody who'd like to ask a question or get involved in the conversation with His Excellency and Geraint here. If you do, you'll have to unmute yourself and wave at the camera so we can actually see who you are and what you want to say. So if somebody wants to wave their arm around, I'll be able to pick you up. I can't, oh, is that the lady there on the top left? Sorry, I can't see your names, so if you would like to ask a question, please do. You have to unmute yourself. Yep, you're all just watching, not getting involved. Well, what I would like to do is I think it would be really great if we could all learn a word of Polish, if His Excellency would try to teach us. I'm not saying it's going to be any reflection on you, Ambassador. I think it's going to be much more of a reflection on, well, certainly myself. I'm sure Geraint would be very good. We thought the most appropriate sort of word to use, seeing as you've had a real whistle-stop virtual tour of Jersey today, would be the word of friendship. So I wonder if you could somehow try to get us to say the word friendship in Polish.
It's a very beautiful word and of course very beautiful meaning. So in Polish, friendship is przyjaźń. Przyjaźń. I don't know if you can repeat.
Przyjaźń. Come.
Przyjaźń.
Yes. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Przyjaźń. Yes, with P at the beginning. Przyjaźń.
Senator, would you like to have a go?
I'm not doing it very well, Your Excellency. It's a P at the beginning, is it? Przyjaźń.
Wonderful. Yes, great. Exactly.
Thank you. And
that's friendship.
yes, indeed. And we all can say that now. And Geraint, would you like to say what it is in Jerriais?
Yes, so many people, when speaking English, use a Jerriais phrase, mon vie. It means my old, but you don't say the word for friend, which is ome, mon vieux ome, my old friend. But many people say mon vie, they know the phrase, mon vie. It's a Jerriais phrase. So friend is ome, but friendship is amieci. Amieci.
Amieci.
Amieci.
Amici.
Amieci.
Amici.
With a y in it. Amieci.
Amieci.
Oh,
Amieci.
very
Well,
good.
I think if you've
Nice word, amieci.
I think, but your
Like
comment,
amigo.
sorry, your comment earlier about how Polish children don't become fluent in their own language until they're 16 was a little bit horrifying, I think. I can understand that why we don't teach that in English schools. We're bad enough at French, I think, with most of the classes over here. So we've all learnt that. It would be great if everybody at home was able to take away those two words of language. And do you have any questions that you have of Polish, or something that you've always wanted to learn about the language?
Well, I think it's more the sort of socio-politic situation with the languages, because the government of Jersey is planning to ratify the European Charter for regional and minority languages in respect of Jerriais. And I don't know if His Excellency has any, I don't know, whether it's encouragement or whether it's tips as to, how you, get a charter like this, a cultural charter, out into the administration, the government, the regions, and most especially the communities. How do you really sort of communicate something which is a high-level European agreement down to something where it's actually being put into effect, into action, down on the ground?
But you mean the minority languages?
Yes.
So as I said, one thing it's a state law which really help minorities or dialects to preserve for them. So, for example, as I said, when there is at least 20% of the population speaking one language, they have this language in the schools, in the state schools, but they have also some state support for the preservation, for the promotion of this language. So nowadays the situation is, let's say, normal, because we are living in the free country. It used to be very difficult before 1989 under communism, and before that under Nazi German occupation, when all the minorities were suppressed, and it was very difficult to keep some languages, and there was so nowadays it's a much better situation, and also, but there is a challenge how to encourage people to keep their languages in Poland when we are talking about minorities or dialects, but also there is a lot, as you know, Polish huge diaspora also in Jersey, in other places, about 20 million Poles living abroad, and it's very difficult for them to keep the language of their children. So there's also another challenge when somebody is living with other country. It's so difficult to keep language in the second or third generation. So there is yes, our common problem and our common challenge.
Well, I think the work that Your Excellency is doing, that Geraint you're doing here in Jersey, and the government is obviously supporting, is fantastic, because clearly language is such a critical part of our identity, our history, and long may it reign, and keep on talking Jerriais and the Polish dialects. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to His Excellency, the Ambassador, for joining us and sharing your cultural history with us, and listening to our own very small island compared to yours. We don't have 20 odd million people out of the island, or in the island, let alone off the island. And I hope you've learnt something about us, because we've certainly learnt something about you. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Geraint, for your insights, and Minister, and thank you all for joining us this evening. And I hope that you all go off and learn a few more words of Jerriais. What's goodbye in Jerriais?
Abitu e alla prochaine.
And Your Excellency, what's goodbye in Polish?
Do widzenia.
Wonderful.
Do widzenia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening.